Hey everybody. So this video is designed to help walk you through working on the stakeholder and really kind of getting that focus, especially as you go from the check-in to the topic proposal. Okay. And just to kind of reiterate, we have gone through feedback towards the stakeholder literally since the first week of the term. So the resource documentation forms, I continue to reiterate the need for the specific stakeholder. Then obviously you got feedback of the introduction, outline, conclusion, we're excited. Rough draft, the peer review material, the final draft. For the first 8 weeks of the term, there's a consistent amount of feedback for stakeholders. And then when we kind of make that shift to project 2, the idea is that we need those specific stakeholders so that we can start focusing our work, right? Because project 1, we're thinking very broadly. We're thinking about how our research is completed, right? And then we're critically analyzing that research, right? So we're developing skills and behaviors that help us write and research at a very academic level that translates into the professional world. And then when we get into the film, we want to be a little bit more focused and really kind of centering on the idea of the stakeholder. So, in the check-in, that's where we really wanted to establish who's the focus of our film. And we're going to start, getting feedback on that thesis statement that is centered on that focus. So in the thesis statement for the check-in, and then ultimately when you carry it over for the topic proposal, we're just looking for that one single stakeholder. And that's important because, again, that is the focus of the film. We can bring other stakeholders in, and that's what we're doing in the topic proposal. In the topic proposal, we have a section in our in that response where we can talk about the secondary stakeholders. But when we get to the script, and we're going to kind of look at it on the board in a second, help you visualize this and map this out a little bit more. When we get to the script, and when we're making the film, it's about that one primary stakeholder. So having that focus, first and foremost, allows you to know, that this is how you're approaching the film as you go deeper into those production steps, okay? So again, in check-in, we're trying to get our primary stakeholder. Who's the central focus of the script? Who are we going to talk about in each of the sections, especially the first 4 sections? And then in the second half, we'll have an opportunity to bring more stakeholders in to help accentuate that primary stakeholder. So either argue against the stakeholder or doing things similar that support the stakeholder, okay? And the other thing about the check-in, we really wanted to make sure last week that we have our video editor chosen, right? Because we're making a film, and so we're going to have to put the film together. And one of the steps for this film is you're just going to take your phone and record your timeline in the video editor. So I could see the video editor, I could see how you're developing it, and the assignment walks you through the specific things that are needed. So the video editor is part of this project, okay? Now, once we had that focus, then we go into the topic proposal. And the topic proposal is a little bit different because first and foremost, we're trying to think about who our audience is and how that relates to the rhetorical genre that we're choosing. So, a lot of you just kind of answered in line. That's okay. Like everything else this term, you get feedback, you'll revise for additional credit. And so in that capacity, what you're trying to do is think about how those two ideas are working together. If you're communicating to a politician, well, then why are you choosing that rhetorical genre based on your topic and fault line and your stakeholder to make that communication, right? If it's a family member, right? Like what's the relationship of the rhetorical genre? The other idea is that, again, the stakeholder is the focus. So we carry the thesis statement over from that focus from the check-in. And then we have an opportunity in the stakeholder section to expand on the stakeholders. One of the things that we really want to kind of consider with the idea of secondary stakeholders is that we don't want too many. We really only want maybe 1 or 2 more on top of our focus. Because again, the film is about the primary stakeholder. So the more stakeholders you bring in, the more you take away from the points that you're trying to make about that stakeholder. Okay. So what I want to do is kind of show you on the board how to start thinking about the next step, because the next step is to download the digital script and to begin building the script. And that's what we'll do over the next couple of weeks. And then we'll do a peer review and you'll get feedback on that. And that's a document that you're going to continue to revise over and over again until you get at least a 40 out of 50. Okay. So I'm going to kind of zero into the board and you can see the notes that I have put up there. Okay. So on the left-hand side, and I would get out a blank sheet of paper and draw this same little diagram yourself to kind of help you think about how you're going to focus the thing, right? How you're going to develop the project ultimately, okay? So first and foremost, on this setup right here, what we're thinking about is who's our primary stakeholder. So we have our specific stakeholder, we'll put them here, okay? And then we have our second stakeholders. So the secondary specific stakeholders that we want to bring in. And we would list them here, okay? And again, we'll really see this because the primary stakeholder is going to take up the bulk of what the script actually is, okay? And then the second stakeholder, we won't bring them in until the second half of the script, okay? And then we put our topic within our fault line and we note the video editor. And having this set up helps us think about, okay, this is the focus of my film, right? This is what I'm going to do for this project. And then when you're ready to get into the scripts, you have a better idea of how you'll actually develop your content within that capacity, okay? Now, these 8 sections you want to think of as body paragraphs. So these are the middle of the essay, right? Now, we'll have an introduction, we'll have a conclusion, we'll have our credits, which function as a works cited. So it's a similar structure in terms of how we approach the academic essay, right? But the idea is that in the first 4 sections, this is where we are connecting a single idea from each resource to the specific stakeholder. So again, let me say that one more time. We want to open up our project 1 final draft. We want to open up all 4 resources. And what we want to do is take a single idea from each of the resource and then relate it to our first stakeholder. That's it. So the idea is that we're going to open our film with the discussion of our research and how it relates to the specific stakeholder, our topic, and our fault line, okay? So again, the first half, and you'll see it in the script, it's structured that way. The first half of the script is really you, again, introducing the resource, introducing the stakeholder, and having that conversation that you had in Project 1. So you'll literally open up Project 1 and pull that language in to help you write the first half, okay? The second half is where we bring the other stakeholders in. The second half of the digital script is where we are going to talk about the stakeholders' interests. So you can either do, 4 points about the stakeholder, or you could bring in other stakeholders as well. So maybe stakeholder 2, maybe you have a stakeholder 3, right? Like we can bring more in. Now, we still want to have at least one section that's about stakeholder 1, right? And again, the second half, we're just looking at their interests. So if it's an organization, if it's an individual, if it's an institution, we can think about programs. We can think about services. We can think about beliefs. We can think about arguments. that address our topic within our fault line. So again, now we go even more focused, right? In the first half, we're thinking about the relationship of the stakeholder and the ideas that we're pulling from the resource. And then in the second half, we're looking at how the stakeholders within the fault line actually address the topic, right? What is their focus? What's their approach? And again, that's what we call interest. What is their interest, right? And, you might bring a stakeholder in that has a competing interest, that's arguing against or has a different approach. That's okay. But again, this is how we'll frame both the academic work that we did from Project One, and then how that relates to the film that we're making. So ultimately, the film is about stakeholder one, okay? And certainly if you want, you could bring additional stakeholders in, but you only bring them in service of stakeholder one, okay? And you're getting a lot of feedback on these first 3 small steps because you're taking the check-in, putting it into the topic proposal. You're taking the check-in, using it to help you focus the digital media resource check-in, right? And then you're taking all of that and you'll put it into the script, okay? And then the script is the bulk of the work for this project, right? When we're thinking about the script, this is where you're going to do, again, at least 3 rounds of feedback, revisions. And when you have that 40 out of 50, you know that you're ready to move forward because you at least have the bare necessities to address the specific stakeholder and you're using the required structure for the script, okay? And then, you'll get feedback on your recording of the audio, and you'll get feedback on how you're building the audio within the timeline. And obviously during office hours, we can meet on something like that, and I can support you with that as well too, okay? So that's another opportunity for you to get additional support as well, okay? So just to recap, okay? What we're doing here is just kind of like drawing out what our plan of action is going to be for the script, okay? First and foremost, we begin by noting who the primary stakeholder is. And for the sake of this, I'm calling our primary stakeholder S1, okay? And then we note any additional stakeholders. You don't have to have any. We'll just make a film about stakeholder 1 if you want, okay? And then we'll note our topic and our fault line, and we'll note the video editor. So now we're thinking about this as our film, right? Like what's going to be our film? And then we're starting to think about the 2 sides of our script, right? And, we'll walk through the script. The topic proposal is going to become the introduction. Once you've written anything, you'll write a conclusion that really kind of like concludes this discussion, right? But there are really 8 sections to the film that you're really kind of communicating your stakeholders' interests or stakeholders' interests. The first 4 sections are touching on one resource at a time. You're pulling a single idea from each resource and explaining how that single idea helps you understand stakeholder 1. How that idea helps you understand how stakeholder 1 addresses the topic within the fault line. And then in the second half, you bring in what they're actually doing, right? And so if you're just going to talk about stakeholder 1 the whole time, that's fine. What are 4 programs or 4 services or arguments or whatever that they have in terms of dealing with the topic in the fault line, right? And again, that's why, in the essay, we were looking for tertiary resources, bringing their websites in so that you can start having that conversation, right? Like that was the function of the stakeholder analysis. Or you at least start with stakeholder 1 in one of the sections, then you bring additional stakeholders in, right? So maybe there's a counter argument, maybe there are stakeholders that are trying to do something different. You can really structure that in the second half and bring those second stakeholders in, okay? So this is you starting to think ahead, and this is why you're getting so much feedback on the check-in, the topic proposal, the digital media check-in, because I want to make sure that you know what you're doing when you get into the script, yeah? And so that you have everything set up, and then you're just expanding. Again, very similar to what we did with Project One, right? I gave you feedback on your annotations for the resource documentation forms. I gave you feedback on the core elements of the essay structure: introduction, conclusion, outline, works cited. And then I gave you feedback on putting it together in a rough draft format, right? In an outline format. And then you had all of that to help you do the final draft. So similar, right? Like breaking it up into small steps, all the steps lead in to the larger piece. So let's take a look at the digital script.